Hey, Happy New Year. And tonight on Strange Planet, I'm welcoming back a guest who doesn't merely analyze world events. He forecasts them with an accuracy that makes governments uncomfortable, markets nervous, and listeners sit a little straighter in their chairs. William Stickevers is a global forecaster, futurist, and geopolitical risk analyst whose clients range from hedge funds to intelligence insiders to people who simply want to understand the forces reshaping our world. For nearly 4 decades, he's built a reputation for predicting global shocks long before they make headlines. The 2008 financial collapse, the cryptocurrency boom, the populist political wave, the AI disruption cycle, and the seismic UAP revelations now unfolding in real time. Every year, William releases a comprehensive global outlook forecast, a document so detailed, so blunt, and so unnervingly prescient that it's become required reading for people who trade on tomorrow rather than speculate about it. And this February marks his 10th annual global report, a milestone analysis he calls the most important warning and roadmap he has ever produced. Because according to William, 2026 is not just another election year, not just another geopolitical turning point. It's a reboot year, a reality reset year, a year when the myths holding our civilization together dissolve, the rules harden, and a new world, unfamiliar, volatile, and absolutely transformative, begins to assert itself. From the collapse of zombie assets to a robotics revolution to the unraveling of UAP secrecy to a potential cosmic kill switch event that could test the fragility of our digital civilization, William says we're heading into a 12-month corridor where the old map of reality simply stops working. And tonight he's here to walk us through it. William Stickevers, welcome back to Strange Planet. How are you?
Great. Thanks for having me back again, Richard.
Your astrology is not the typical astrology people read about in the newspaper, the horoscope. Explain how yours is so much more comprehensive, so much more complex than what people may be familiar with.
Yeah, we basically look at we frame the astrology from a macrocosmic perspective, or what we would call in investing macro, right? So the macro perspective of how the larger cycles are impacting and constellating their energies, through the archetypal forces that are present. So what we look at is the planetary alignments that are impacting the larger macro geopolitical factors that are in play, that when those alignments have constellated, historically, we can get a very good idea about not only how they're likely, how they will project themselves, but how they will likely manifest. And it really helps once you have a very good comprehensive understanding of what's happening in the world. It's much easier to make informed forecasts. So what makes it more complex than the typical astrology is we just don't look at one chart. We don't look at just the chart of the U.S. or the chart of the President of the United States, although those are important charts. We look at over 700 factors, and we can do this now with AI and with the enterprise astrology software that we use. And taking in all the data, we can get an idea of what the biggest themes that are going to most likely manifest in which areas of the world or in the world stage are likely to be where they're likely to express most acutely.
So I don't know if this is even an answerable question, but do the cosmic alignments, the planetary alignments, are they simply mirroring cycles that unfold here on Earth, or are they in some way influencing human behavior and causing those cycles here on Earth?
Yeah, that's the $64 billion question. It's a good question. I think it's a bit of both. I think that they correlate synchronistically. So what we call in astrology archetypal synchronicity is where we have particular planetary alignments or ingresses that correlate with certain types of collective behavior that has been measured and has been measured and documented. And we notice that there's correlation, but what we could also argue, and this is something Jung would bring up, Carl Jung, he stated that the archetypes form and inform. So they form and inform material matter because everything is derived from consciousness. So from the standpoint of astrology, all material matter, all things manifesting physically in the world are all derivatives of consciousness. And the archetypal constellation of various different archetypes that correlate with planetary alignments form and inform and shape behaviors, markets, will shape the outcome of a particular issue. So it's a bit of both. It's a bit of both.
All right. So let's talk about the year ahead, 2026. What is rebooting 2026? What is rebooting in 2026? Is it civilization? Is it economics? Reality itself? What?
Yeah, so I would say it's reality itself. So the major theme for 2026 is the Great Boot sequence. It's essentially a civilizational bottleneck where the destruction phase of the old world order reaches exhaustion and a new unstable architecture begins to lock in. And this period is defined essentially by a transition from emergency improvisations to a new structure in governance, new structure in finance, and intelligence that is built under pressure than consensus. So this is why the Saturn-Neptune conjunction is considered like this reality reset. That occurs on February 20th. And it's a rare conjuncture because it occurs at 0 degrees of Aries, known as the world axis or world point. And this is framed as a structural reset of the global reality contract where the dissolution of old myths, right, secrecy, meets the imposition of hard rules and enforcement. So essentially the postmodern world order that's been in place since 1945 has been going through a state of dissolution and decay, and now we're transitioning into that reality reset. And that's why all the problems we see are simply symptoms of a decaying, dying, postmodern world order.
So what would you say, what would the signs be that these old myths are dissolving right now, and what replaces them?
Well, I mean, right now, what replaces them, that's a little bit of a mystery. Like the archetypes, it's almost impossible to predict exactly how this is all going to play out because we've never been in this time of history. We've never had a Saturn-Neptune on the world point in the modern era. We can't go back 36 years. The last Saturn-Neptune conjunction, by the way, correlated with the collapse of the Soviet Union.
Wow.
So we're going to have a much more powerful Saturn-Neptune conjunction this time because it's on the world axis. So that tells me that it's almost impossible to know the type of world. I mean, to think of the world, the world of globalization and the dot-com era and all the things that proliferated shortly after the collapse of the Soviet Union was impossible for anyone to discern or forecast back in 1989, 1990. But that's exactly what happened. The fact that China would surpass Russia in military technological power in such a short time and become a rival to the U.S. back in 1990 was just almost considered laughable, right? So the type of world we're moving into is just going to be just as unfathomable as the world that you lived in prior, right, to 1990. So no one could see this happening. I mean, just the fact that the Soviet Union collapsed, you would have predicted and said, in January 1st, 1990, the Soviet Union will completely collapse along with the empire. right? There'll be a massive breakup. You would have been laughed off of. You would have been laughed off of coast to coast if coast to coast existed at that time, right? So we got to understand that the world we're moving to, nobody can really call it like where it's going. All we can tell you is what is fracturing, what is dissolving, what is breaking down. And one of the things, as you probably already know, and you see it in your own country, it's actually happening faster, is the monetary fracture and we're seeing the breakdown of the monetary system, right? We see the terminal stress of the post-World War II monetary regime. And we're seeing zombie assets, right? And all currencies are going to zero, including the dollar. But the dollar will go the last, right? Because it's the world reserve currency, but it's moving towards zero. And everything else is following it even faster. So we're seeing that. And we're also seeing, so when we see that collapse, we're seeing the rise of a whole new infrastructure take place with the emergence of artificial general intelligence, right? Mm-hmm. And we're going to see intelligence is now becoming commoditized, right? Intelligence is going to be everywhere. Right. And that is going to be the biggest game changer, because the need to go to college or get a degree, all those things that you had to go through in the postmodern era are completely wiped out and eliminated.
Right. And now all of a sudden you have a child or a teenager in, let's say, the Congo,
right,
with access to the internet, now can write a Princeton University level business plan without even graduating high school.
That's right. So, like living in America and having the upper middle class life and then going to Harvard, Princeton, and Yale to give you the, massive advantage over, everyone else on the planet is almost completely wiped out, or soon will be. And so we don't know what type of world is. That kid in Kenya, right, or Sudan can actually get a mobile wallet on his phone and start trading Bitcoin or any other type of tokenized assets. In fact, all assets starting in 2026 will be trading 24/7. So you could buy $1 a Tesla, right? Or you could buy $1 million a Tesla. You could move that and swap it into gold, swap it into Bitcoin, move that across to somebody else's iPhone within seconds with no middleman, no government, no IRS. Right? So we're going to see a great equalization occur across the planet at a much faster pace than anybody is anticipating.
So let's go back to Feb 20th, because that's when the alignment happens and this reality reset. So something dies on that day, something is born, but we're not sure what yet. Is that the idea?
Well, I think a few things. I think one of the things about it has to do with the fact that, look, we could argue, like we could talk about all the greatest inventions of mankind, but I would say that fire, right, would be right up there, probably arguably number one, because without fire, we couldn't forge tools. We would not have a civilization, right? It'd be impossible to do agriculture, right? Even agriculture, right, to without forging tools. So the equivalent, right, is going to be AI. And AI moving from talking, just chatting with you, to acting, to being in the physical world is going to be correlating with this alignment. Money moving from belief to enforcement, institutions losing narrative control. All of this is all going to hit very fast. I also see technological breakthroughs, right? And I also see escalating disclosure pressure, right? Disclosure about the UFO issue, about many, many issues that have been, right? We're going to see much more of that. So the year really technically starts during the conjunction, even though January 1st is a few days away, right? 2026 astrologically is when the end of the postmodern era begins on February 18th, February 20th, that period, where the moment that the old operating system crashes and the new one starts installing while the hardware is still overheating.
Who is going to handle this reset better? Governments, markets, or the average person?
It's going to happen on its own. I mean, I think, people are looking for the dollar to crash and everybody, using gold and silver to get through the day. I think that's not going to happen at all. I do think that there is the reset. I think AI is going to drive this reset. I think when artificial general intelligence gets fully operational sometime between February and April of this year, things start changing much faster than people can keep up with. And I believe the financial system is going to be the first thing that goes through a big shift, along with the fact that we're going to see 40% unemployment between now and late 2027 in all the first and second world economies globally.
Right. You mentioned tokenization of assets.
Right.
Does that include all of our personal assets, our houses, our 401ks, for those in the United States, our RRSPs up here in Canada, our pensions and so forth? Is that going to be all tokenized? Does that really mean we will own nothing?
No, you actually will own it. All right. In fact, it doesn't function. So the tokenization is basically putting the certificate on a blockchain, digitizing the certificate and putting it on a blockchain, which becomes immutable, right? So all you need is KYC to prove who you are, right? That gets linked to that certificate on a blockchain, whether it's an Ethereum blockchain or Solana blockchain. It'll probably be one of those two. And that's basically what's going to happen. In fact, your car titles, your home titles, everything is going to be tokenized. Everything. And when I say this, it's not going to happen in 1 year, but the beginning of the tokenization, it's sort of like, when did everyone move away from rotary phones to cell phones? It took a little while, but when it was only about 3 to 5 years before it was complete.
Right.
Yeah.
And you've warned of this synchronized zombie asset purge, housing, pensions, private equity, all breaking at once. I mean, it sounds like you're saying people's retirements could vaporize.
Yes and no. So we're going to see the zombie assets, right? Overvalued housing, overvalued private equity, mismanaged pensions, underfunded pensions. We're going to see where the belief meets the balance sheet crisis, right? Where people will be in disbelief. And yet, at the same time, governments will be required to do massive money printing and bailouts. So they're going to, in the process of all that money printing, in order to prevent a zombie asset apocalypse, the devaluation or debasement of currency will accelerate and intensify. And the blowback of that will all be high inflation as we get towards the end of the year or certainly into the beginning of 2027. So the end of 2026 is when we start having real inflation issues that are systemic to all the different types of bailouts of these zombie assets.
What are we talking here? Like Weimar Republic? Are we talking about Zimbabwe?
No, so we're not going to get to that point, right? We have too many things in place. The Federal Reserve can print enough money and inject that liquidity to Canada. It can inject it into all the different institutions, because the problem is if it lets the Canadian pension system go, that pension system is incestuously tied into our pension system and our markets. So we cannot allow anything. We cannot really allow anything to go down to zero. You cannot let the collateral of any asset to go to zero. And that would be the thing. There'll be massive, like sort of what, like there'll be certain institutions going into receivership and merging with other institutions. banks, right? I'm expecting another big bank failure. But again, what will happen is they'll just inject liquidity to prevent contagion from spreading. But what the downside of that, of course, is the fact that the currency is going to continue to drop precipitously. So it's short-term relief, but your purchasing power continues to drop. On top of the fact that you're going to get more and more people who are very smart, very capable, very ambitious, unemployed simply because the world does not need them, at least in terms of their capacity for work. We're going to be transitioning from where you need labor to create capital to where you can create capital with no labor. A post-labor economic system is emerging simultaneously with all these zombie assets that are based on this old fractional reserve lending, banking, trading system is collapsing. So this is why next year it's really hard to predict exactly it's going to be this, it's going to be that. It's going to be all of these things. We're going to have like if 2025 was the blue screen of death, that popped up intermittently, right? Mm-hmm. And then, right, 2026 is the boot sequence, right? Where you where you're forced now to load new software or a new driver to get the operating system back up. So I do see AI playing a big role in all of this as a solution. So the AI solution will be rolled out much quicker than anybody anticipates as well.
So let's talk about UAPs and UAP secrecy. You're saying that we're going to experience, or who's ever keeping the lid on UFOs, they're going to face a containment failure in 2026. So what is going to leak? Are we talking about files? Are we talking about materials? Are we talking about biologics?
So I don't know if you remember the Pentagon files.
Oh, yes. Yeah.
Right. So that happened in the late 60s, early 70s. And what happened is people inside of the Pentagon, and particularly in the intelligence agencies, submitted files to a journalist that published classified information that the U.S. would need another 60,000 men. That, everything that was being reported on TV about the state of the war and how we were winning and how, North Korea was about to collapse, all of that was fictitious. And the casualty rates were higher, right? And the drug usage among soldiers was killing them more than the actual combat, et cetera, et cetera. And it caused such a big scandal that Nixon was forced to end the war. People don't give him credit for that, but, right, Nixon ended the war, and the draft ended in 1973. All more so than for the Pentagon files, than all the protests. Protests did nothing, zero, right? People want to believe it was the protests. No, it was the Pentagon. So what happened was a lot of people resigned, and it was then that was followed by Watergate. So here's the equivalent. Same thing playing out, but this time it's with the UFO file. It's the UFO file. So you have to think of this disclosure that's already technically started since 2017 and has picked up speed quite a bit. Not as a single light switch being flipped, but as a theater production. So it's highly probable that we will see, a lot of drama being played out here with a Pentagon Papers release event, mainly where we see a bunch of people inside of DIA or CIA or a combination decide to go meet with 6 journalists, right, who publish independently in different parts of the world, give them that data, similar to what Edward Snowden revealed. But this time, this is the difference. When this comes out, it will not be containable. The plausible deniability collapses. It collapses. So the thing is that, there's a low probability that extraterrestrials will officially go public, but there's a high probability we're going to see the beginning, the slow drip confirmation strategy. Government knows the only thing they can do to contain this is to begin a slow drip confirmation process, right? Because we already have disclosure.
Right.
I mean, it's very clear now. So we're going to have that type of, and it'll be part of a deliberate behavioral conditioning, right? But it will, and also there's enough evidence coming out within different intelligence agency informants that there's an unavoidable event in 2027. I do not know if that's absolutely true, but this is coming from people who've worked in Washington and who've worked for the CIA and other intelligence agencies. So,
when you say, sorry, you say an unavoidable event.
Unavoidable.
Are we talking about contact, or are we talking about some cataclysmic event like a meteorite?
I mean, this is something where the government is where they need to go forward with disclosure for what is likely to play out in 2027, but that it's really not clear. Now, this has been articulated by a number of people within the UFO community on podcasts and various different podcasts. And these are not UFO community people. They're people who worked in the CIA, right, in particular. So we're going to hear a lot more of that. We're going to hear a lot more about 2027, which happens to coincide with the U.S. Uranus return. And that's significant. Why? Well, this is the third Uranus return. The second Uranus return was we had Bretton Woods, World War II, and the dropping of the Hiroshima and Nagasaki bombs on Japan, all within the same year. If you go back another 84 years, you have the Bank of England basically defaulted, and you had the outbreak of the Civil War.
Wow.
Okay? And if you go back another 84 years, you have the Boston Tea Party and the Revolutionary War that breaks out between the colonies and Great Britain. So something big is coming. Now, some astrologers out there, I would just say many, because believe we're going to have a U.S. Civil War between the blue pill folks, right, and the red pill folks. I don't see any of that happening. Now, we may have more schism because it's an election year, midterms. That schism will become more apparent. But I don't see us moving into a civil war of any type. What I do see is the schism between the people within the intelligence agency that believe we need to go forward with this disclosure for this unavoidable event in 2027, and other factors, right? And those who are trying to stop it, the legacy group that's trying to prevent it at all costs for various reasons. So what we're talking about here is the schism creates an ontological crisis because the leaks are coming, and government knows it's going to need to work with different people in the media to begin the process of confirmation.
So the government is softening the public right now.
Yes.
Is that the idea? We're in this conditioning phase because they know it's unavoidable. Official disclosure is coming. You mentioned the Uranus return. It sounds like what? It's ushering in what's called the fourth turning?
Yes, it coincides with the fourth turning, right? I just happened to I read the book, The Fourth Turning, back in 1997-98 when it came out, and I just happened to note the dates, and I said, that's every 84 years, right? And then they say they made a prediction that within the late 2020s, the U.S. will go through another fourth turning crisis. So that happens to coincide exactly. Now, of course, these fourth turning crises don't happen in 1 year. It's a buildup. It's usually a 20-year period, and then it peaks during the time of the Uranus return. So their period, according to the authors, was starting 2007, 2008, up to 2028. So that 20-year period would be the fourth turning. And it just so happens Uranus return occurs in 2027 and 2028. So it hits in 2027 goes back and forth a few times, makes one last hit, I believe in 2028. And that's going to be the peak or the third final act of the fourth turning crisis.
All right. I want to talk about some particulars coming up this in 2026. In May of 2026, Jerome Powell's term. He is the chair of the Federal Reserve. President Trump is not a fan of Jerome Powell. I think he'd like to fire him before the end of his term. But you said the end of his term is going to trigger the end of the Federal Reserve, or the end of Federal Reserve independence. How does that happen?
Yeah, well, so that's interesting because what we're going to see is where government is dictating monetary policy. So in other words, you have fiscal policy, which is basically determined by, let's say, the executive branch, members of Congress, the Treasury, right? And then you have monetary policy, bank policy, and basically the determination of interest rates and how markets are trading, what the fees that go with it. Now you're going to see Trump essentially merge both policies where the government is basically, the central bank is going to basically being dictated to what those policies are going to be, right? So that is where we see a reality reset of finance. And part of it, here's the gist of it is you have a policy of liquidity, right? The Fed is, so basically the executive branch is dictating policy to the Fed to use stimulus, backstops, bailouts, money printing to keep the financial system afloat. However, that pump, the Trump pump that's coming, I'm calling it the Trump pump, is increasingly at odds with the economic gravity characterized by exploding debt, private, public, federal, you name it, right? And the debt burdens and system fragility that has been exploding since COVID. Actually, it's not, COVID was just the icing on the cake. It all started in 2008.
Right.
So basically 2026 is where liquidity is being used not to solve a structural problem while the fractional reserve fiat-based system is collapsing, but merely to postpone a larger reckoning. And at the same time, we have this reality reset of finance emerging, right, coming up, that's based on tokenization, decentralized markets, decentralized currencies, right? All this whole new genre, this whole different universe will be emerging at the same time.
So
down one, up with another.
And so what does a politicized or a political Federal Reserve mean for the economy? Let's say the everyday Americans. What does it mean?
It means that all dollar-based assets will continue. Okay, on paper, like for example, the S&P 500 on paper made around 19%, but you have to subtract 50% from that 19%. Why? Because, right, gold went up 50%. I think it's 52%. I think silver went up as high as 60%. But we're going to use gold because central banks hold gold. So all central banks hold gold because that's the only thing they can agree on. So all currencies are basically valued against gold. And so when you subtract gold against the S&P, you lost money. On paper, you made money, but your purchasing power drops significantly. And that continues and will continue to accelerate and intensify. That's what it means. On paper, you think your pension is fine, but you are getting poorer and poorer and poorer against gold, and even more so with Bitcoin, right? So because Bitcoin outperforms gold over a 16-year period, right? And gold has outperformed the S&P 500 and the NASDAQ over a 16-year period. Maybe not so much the NASDAQ, let me take that back. right? But the S&P 500, it's outperformed for the past 16 years. So that's what it means, that what has been going on accelerates and intensifies because we have a midterm coming up and Trump is going to pull all the stops out, everything under the sun to ensure Republicans win Congress.
Right. We're seeing this now with
Congress.
redistricting in Texas and a number of states.
Right.
Yeah. Is he going to run for a third term?
No.
No. Okay. All right. I want to get into robotics here for a moment. You're predicting a robotics iPhone 1 moment this April. I mean, what breakthrough is coming that the public isn't ready for?
Yeah, I mean, I'm putting together an article called 2026, the year AI becomes the operating system, right? So it will be, it's where artificial intelligence evolves from a simple tool that you have on your computer to a fundamental operating system for the whole global economy. So we're going to see everything shift towards digitized labor. Autonomous agents will be boosting productivity, right? So including you'll be using agents. By this time next year, you'll be saying, "Oh my God, I didn't have to hire someone for my marketing. I have my agent doing this, and now I have more listeners than ever, William. I can't even believe this is possible because the AI figured out who my ideal listener is, and then just targeted those people, right?" So we're talking about the digitization of labor, utilizing autonomous agents that's going to boost productivity and fundamentally change traditional labor markets. And basically we're going to see where a lot of the different infrastructure bottlenecks are going to be completely obliterated with this emergence. So the AI iPhone moment is where where it becomes real. It becomes real in every sense of the word. It's not just something you dabble in or you use to write an essay with or to help you, do a promo on something. It's basically going to shift the entire way we work, we generate capital, how it's going to redefine labor. It's going to redefine traditional economy. And what's going to come out is going to be like the equivalent of when Henry Ford came out with the Model T. So there was cars from 1873 up to 1913. But most households, 90% of households, I think 99% of households worldwide or in the United States did not have one.
Right.
That drastically changed with the Model T Ford, which is essentially the modern car with transmission, brakes, etc. So we're going to have a Model T Ford moment with AI in 2026.
Is that boost in productivity going to be enough to pay people to sit on their hands because there won't be any, not any jobs, but there'll be such a permanent massive job displacement? Will it be enough to erase public debt, for example?
Yeah, so there's a whole new economic system, and it would take a whole show for me to go into that. But I will say this, that the way, okay, so yeah, it's like trying to touch the tip of the iceberg here is the government is going to be forced to restructure the entire operating system of the economy over the next 4 years. And this will be the biggest issue, the biggest argument going into the 2028 election on how this needs to be done. Because we're going to have, physical AI, next year becomes the year also, not with autonomous agents, where you can just get an autonomous agent to do the work for the people you generally hire to do something for your business. But it's also going to be where AI becomes physical, where the AGI gets embedded into a physical robot that's capable of doing everything from repairing a transmission to changing the baby's diapers at home, right? So this is the other factor. Now, in terms of what government's going to do, that's going to be a big, massive economic, political debate. And that is part of what this crisis is about. It's going to be about.
Okay. But you've also said the biggest crisis of 2026 is not collapse, but identity. I mean, what happens when human labor loses value? I would imagine people could start to get violent.
Yes. So I think at first we're not going to see the violence erupt so fast. We're just going to see, right, people getting laid off and the government underreporting the numbers purposely. I mean, right, they already underreport. I mean, only 63% of Americans who are capable of working are working. Everybody else is looking for work and they can't get a job. I mean, so that's going to double, right? And so they're already underreporting the numbers. But yeah, so do I see violence breaking out? Do I see, labor protests and stuff like that? That's more 2027, right?
Mm.
So I do think this is more of a slow burn, but the plausible deniability breaks down. By this time next year, we're going to have a very different discussion about labor, because at that point, I mean, if you've read The Economist in the World Ahead in 2026, they talk about this particularly, and especially the other issue is while this is all happening and we have the midterm elections, we have this like high stakes poker game occurring between the United States and China, right? Over trade, right? Over scarce resources such as minerals, right? And we're going to see, so it's going to be sort of a situation where nations are, the U.S. is playing this high stakes game, right, for global dominance with China, while at the same time, the very structure and foundation of the economic engine and the financial engine or the financialization of the economy is going to be disintegrating, right, at the same time. So it's going to be like, and the other thing too is all future U.S. national security, the latest national security report that came out on the United States is going to totally focus on industrialization. It knows it needs to go back and compete with China industrially, but we all need to realize that it's all going to be robots doing 90% of that employment, of that labor. So this is where I'm saying it's a very hard year to actually predict, because there's going to be all these things coming at you from all different ways that we didn't have this year. We just had rumors. We had good podcast shows. We had good coast to coast, discussions about it. It was all like abstract, theoretical. We had a few examples, but then starting February, we're going to get deluged with this.
This is where the rubber meets the road in February of 2026. There's a term I think you use, ambient rivalry, which suggests what we're already in a global war. We're already in World War III. Just no government wants to officially announce. Is that the idea?
Yeah, basically we are in a war. So this type of rivalry is happening at the cyber level. It's like fifth generational warfare, right? And getting dominance in particular domains that will be critical for who is going to dominate the world, who's going to set the rules of engagement for the remainder of the 21st century. And that will be determined between now and the end of this fourth turning cycle. So if you just look at it, the beginning of the fourth turning cycle, in the last fourth turning, right, you had Europe sort of running the show, Germany and Britain, right? And then, right, you had America rise at the very end, right? And now we're going to see another rivalry play out. And it's this question of who's going to rise. So it's really clear. I mean, one thing is really clear. America does know it cannot sit on its laurels. I mean, the biggest mistake Britain made, right, was sitting on its laurels that resulted in the collapse of its empire by the end of the Second World War. So we're going to see geopolitical realignments. We're going to see Taiwan. Taiwan is going to be real pivotal to this type of power, right? This type of, right? And so we're going to see. We're also going to see the U.S. get very involved with South America again because China is too embedded in there. So we're going to see a lot of the strategic ambiguity going on all over the place, but particularly in the global South, in Central and South America. We're going to see some big plays, and we're going to see it with the escalating trade war. So we're going to see a lot more, and then supply chain resilience. So the U.S. is trying to basically trump, if you will, China's +6 strategy to diversify manufacturing. So that they're trying to neutralize, that rebuild supply chain resilience, and become more independent of that. So and then also this just the technology war, right? The U.S. needs to achieve artificial superintelligence. First, it needs to achieve AGI first. And China is prioritizing rapid adoption of AI models across all of its industry and society right now. So they want to become the first intelligent society by 2030. The U.S., even though we have state-of-the-art AI, we have too many cartels. We have the teachers union. We have the Federal Reserve. We have the banks. We have everyone saying, no, we're not going AI. We're not going tokenization. The resistance is strong. Right? We're never going to use AI in manufacturing. You hear that from GM, but I can assure you that that resistance is going to collapse. But China is going to implement AI in a spectacular way.
The United States turns 250 in 2026, and you say it will be a legitimacy contest. But how fragile is the republic heading into that anniversary?
Well, the big issue is the fact that are we going to remain a republic? And maybe on paper we are, but I think the U.S. is going to act more like an empire. I think that's part of the issue. You have to remember the Roman Empire was a republic for 700 years until the crisis, right? It had its first crisis, and then the rise of Caesar Augustus, right, which was the solution being implemented at the time. And by the way, the the Roman Republic was going through its 248-year return, where it went from public to empire. Now the question becomes, will the United States go from republic to empire?
Right. The king breaker eclipse over Europe. What is that? I mean, you're predicting sovereignty ruptures and potential government collapses. I mean, which governments are wobbling?
Well, first of all, Germany is on the skids, right? Germany and France. So it's a real argument who's going to fall first and fastest. German industry is kaput. France is on an unsustainable path. And then you have to throw in the UK. The UK is politically dissolving right in front of us. So all three. Now, so when you're talking about the Eurozone, we're talking about like the fact that Italy keeps threatening to break. All you need is one nation to break from the Eurozone and Brussels completely collapses. So I see something big happening there. It's really hard to call it, right? Is this going to be where we're going to have a scandal? I do believe Germany is moving into a depression. Now, all of this could change should that Russian oil and Russian natural gas start pumping into Europe again. That might be the game changer. But we're going to see Europe. So Europe is going to be in a worse case economically, if you can believe it, right? Probably similar to what's happening in China. So China is on the verge of a depression. Europe is in a recession teetering, right, into a potential depression. And nobody has any liquidity except the United States. So that's the big issue. And the United States cannot allow Europe, or China for that matter, to go under. Even if China is our arch nemesis, it's got too much vested in joint, it has too much business going on to allow China to go under at the same time. So this is why it gets all messy. So I do think Europe is going to have a big break moment. And that could also be connected with what's happening with NATO.
Right. And so what's the king breaker eclipse? Is that an actual eclipse we're talking about?
Yeah, I mean that one would be well. There's a few eclipses, right? So we have the one on February 17th, right near the Saturn-Neptune world point conjunction. So I believe that sets off. So you could actually say the year technically starts, right, in terms of feeling like 2026 is really here on February 17th on the eclipse. And then we have the Saturn-Neptune that surely follows. Then we have that August 12th total solar eclipse over Europe. And remember, all the different, if you look at the history of Europe, all their major wars or all their major collapses economically or bank failures occurred in the month of August, if you go back historically. So August, when you have an eclipse and you've got conditions like you have now, something is going to give somewhere inside of Europe.
All right. So is it heading towards fragmentation or reinvention or both?
I think fragmentation for now. I think we could safely say fragmentation. I do see scandal coming up with Brussels. I don't think that's going to be surprising to anyone. I also, it really depends on what happens now. I thought we would have a resolution with the Ukraine war with Russia until last night, right? I mean, that was about to come to close until somebody, some rogue actor or group within Ukraine military decided to do a strike on Putin's house, right? At the time that Zelensky was talking with Trump in Mar-a-Lago. So all bets are off on this. So that could, now let me tell you this, every major war started, European, right, war or world war started in August. Now, does that mean there'll be war in 2026? No, but we could see if the war with Russia isn't resolved, we may see escalation, and we may see the Russians do things. The Russians will force the issue with the escalation. In other words, they will respond to it.
Right, right. So in the future, we may look back on World War III, and the start maybe was like 2014 when Russia invaded Ukraine, much the way we look at the Second World War as, September 1939 when the Germans invaded Poland, but actually you could go back like a decade, not quite a decade, when Japan invaded Manchuria. That was maybe the start of the Second World War.
In 1935, yes.
Right, right. So speaking of war, a different type of war, though, you mentioned a culture war between enhanced humans and natural humans. This is fascinating. I mean, are we approaching a new species divide?
Yeah, I mean, I believe we're going to see people. So one of the big things, okay, so this is not particularly going to be happening in the next 12 months, but what I do see emerging is that there's going to be massive breakthroughs with technology, medical technology by AI. I mean, it's already in process, but it'll be accelerated by the AI, where you could essentially enhance your DNA and fuse with the AI at a collective level. Or maybe if, so you're basically going to be enhanced at the genetic level with a certain level of precision, right? And from there, you'll be able to interface with AI that gives you the same capability of having your own large language model, right? So you're operating, right? Your intelligence is operating at the state-of-the-art large language model or transformer model that of that period, while your DNA is being enhanced. And part of this has to do with the advances we're seeing with anti-aging technology. So we're going to see anti-aging and DNA genetic enhancements, where humans are going to be able to think and do things. Like, for example, give you an example, like how long does it take to learn a language? At least 20,000 hours of consistent practice, which could be reduced down to, let's say 2 or 3 days, or maybe hours.
Wow.
Things that would take 20,000 hours could be reduced down to hours or days of learning to achieve mastery.
Well, how quickly does this bio-optimization become mainstream?
I think between now and 2032, it's going to be like a bit of a creep, right? We're going to see where people will be able to, be able to read, like, without taking a speed reading course. They'll be able to read, the whole Bible within 2 hours or an hour, right? It'll start off like that. You'll see podcasts on this, and I use these glasses, and then it allows me to do these things that I could never do. Or I'm able to understand calculus now, right? It'll be little things like that before we see this big, big exponential explosion, right? Where people are re-engineering themselves.
Wow. I think the most ominous phrase in your forecast is the cosmic kill switch. What is that exactly? What's the system? What are we talking about here? A cosmic kill switch.
Yeah, so the cosmic kill switch is essentially the fact that we could see a ontological crisis, right? We could see an ontological crisis that the reality reset results in an ontological crisis because all the different domains that were true and unquestionable, things that we considered were facts, are breaking down. Okay. For coast to coast listeners and people in your podcast listeners and all that, this is all going to be great. This is going to be like Christmas for them. But for many people out there, they're going to be freaking out. So I think the cosmic kill switch is the ontological shift, the ontological crisis. Everything you thought you knew to be true about government, about the history, about this, about that, is all going to be turned inside out, upside down. And the other thing, too, is a lot of people get meaning from their work, right? I mean, it's just natural. And so we're going to see, beside, the fact that identity crisis from labor displacement. And then when you see the narrative capture of UFO disclosure, and then you see, all this infrastructure brittleness play out here. I think that, and then AI gets hands and AI becomes real, right? And right, and the invisible management becomes visible. And when you see a culmination of all these things happening, this is where, people in the Soviet Union and people who were living under the Iron Curtain had an ontological crisis on top of a fiscal crisis or physical crisis, right? They didn't have money, they didn't have food, the phones didn't work, the TV didn't work, right? For months. And nobody reported that. You see shows on it now, right? On the History Channel on YouTube, right? And they went to an ontological crisis as well. So I believe, I don't think it will be quite like the collapse of the Soviet Union, right? But I do think a bunch of things are going to give that it'll become obvious when it happens, but it's very difficult to pinpoint what it's going to be. So I think it's a combination of all of these things. And I think the identity crisis, I think an ontological crisis ultimately comes down to how my place in the world. I could say this is who I am and what I do based on all these things that have always held to be true and no longer are now. Now they're all up for question. So I think that happens. And the plausible deniability of the mainstream media to keep the narrative going is going to break down even faster. It's almost laughable now. I don't know anyone who's really in that. Like who can get through CNN anymore? Get through a half hour of CNN without.
Right. Well, this crisis you're talking about, it almost sounds like 2026, 2027, shaping up to be the years that your conspiracy theorist cousin is proven correct.
Right. That's right. All the conspiracy theorists folks out there are going to be validated, right? And a lot of people are going to have, look, a lot of people should give them an apology, although most won't, right? Because of the issue of pride. But I do think that, again, like I just think that disclosure, right? The containment failure. So I think the big thing going on is not just containment failure with UFOs, it's containment failure with other things we've sort of known about, but we can never prove out. We can never prove that out. We couldn't get anyone on the inside to confirm. And I believe that is going to be part. So like the Pentagon Papers, right? The U.S. is, right? The U.S. was losing the war, was winning all the big battles, by the way, but it was losing the war nonetheless at all these other levels, like death by 1,000 cuts. And it was going to escalate deployment, right? When they were telling everybody, we're going to lower deployment, we're going to negotiate or whatever. So it was just the opposite. I believe that type of containment failure is going to become very big. I believe we're going to find a lot more about what really happened when COVID. What was the containment failure with that one? So we'll find out a lot more. The question does it break through the CNN, Fox News narrative? I do have to hand Fox News some credit here. They have had extensive interviews with David Grush.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, David Grush on UFO disclosure, extensive. This is on Fox News. So hopefully we'll see that happen, right? It'll proliferate. But at the same time, right, you have to remember when the Soviet Union was collapsing, the government hardened they hardened down on the news. So it was a big surprise to us if you were only following mainstream news. But for people who were in the know, knew that something was breaking down. So I do think we could see a Soviet-type collapse that is related to some containment failure. And this could collapse some financial institutions or some big bank. Silicon Valley Bank, I just want to bring this up. Just in 2023, in March 2023, Silicon Valley Bank went in trouble.
Yep.
They had to inject more money. Listen to this, more money than the entire 2008, 2009 crisis and the Great Depression combined in order to salvage the bank and to prevent a cascading set of daisy chain events to prevent a systemic breakdown in the banking system. So the amount of money is enormous, and yet crickets
Exactly.
all over the place.
I wasn't aware of that. I mean,
Yeah.
I heard about the Silicon Valley Bank, but not that kind of capital infusion. So as we wrap this up, for the person listening tonight, someone who feels like the ground is shifting, or the rug's being pulled out from their feet, what's the smartest thing they can do heading into 2026?
Yeah, I mean, I just reduce some of the single point dependencies like banking, job narrative, like realize that, look at alternatives, build some skills, start networking, get some AI skills. I think everybody, even if you're a toilet paper manufacturer, you need to become an AI company. If you're a podcaster, you need to become an AI company. If you're an astrologer, you need to become an AI company, okay? You can't compete with somebody who's just as skilled as you or trained as you or experienced as you who's using AI, and you're not, you're going to go out of business. So that's the first thing. And, I think the other important thing is stay calm. Reboot used to feel chaotic, but they create new foundations. This will not last forever. There's a reason why we're going through this, right? So I think that's what they really need to do. And also, I just think being dependent on a bank is not a smart thing to have their assets in different things. Do not depend on that savings account. Do not depend on your pension. Do not depend on your Social Security.
All right. One more question as we head into Feb 20th. Should we be concerned about infrastructure, things like the grid or satellite communication on that day?
No, I don't think on that day.
Oh, you froze.
I think anything will happen on that. Right, we see a submarine hit a boat or something like that, but I don't really think we're going to see that. I do see infrastructure issues, but I do see more like what we may see as another oil spill or an issue with containment, right? Where we have a containment problem that affects the environment. And so I mean, these are things we can't really do much, right? But I just think we need to reset our identities, prepare mentally, identify, identity must evolve behind labor at this point. That's a big thing I see coming. Like if you're so bound up with your job and your identity with that, you're going to be in for a rough time.
An asset class we should avoid at all costs, what would that be?
I think everything is in a bubble, more or less. So I do think you need to be invested in non-correlated assets. Like Bitcoin and gold have no correlation. So those are two good assets to be invested in because they have no correlation, right? And every asset outside of those two underperform over time, right? All assets, dollar-based, currency-based assets underperform. So I would just say, I think the other big issue is if currencies are underperforming, it's like putting your money in bonds, state bonds, government bonds, all these type of bonds, right? On paper, they get 2-3%, but the inflation rate, when you add the basement plus inflation, that's 8% a year. So unless your bonds are getting over 8% a year, you're losing money. So I think the big one to stay away from is the bonds.
Okay. And finally, does 2026 end with more order or more chaos?
Well, 2026 isn't the end. It's the install process for the next world. And I do think it's going to get very exciting, but I don't think it's going to be a year where we have much clarity on how it's all going to land or how it's all going to end up. Anyone who's saying that, I'd be very wary of them. I do think that all we're going to realize now is that we're in a crisis that's both spiritual, right, ontological in nature, as well as financial, political, that this is all part of a new world that's emerging while an old world order dies.
All right. Now, in another big event coming in February, we have your, this is your 10th global forecast, global outlook forecast. Yes. Tell us about how we can get in on that.
Yeah, so people can find my work at williamstickevers.com. I also do monthly briefings on geopolitics and finance and forecasting society, civilizational transformation, like what we're talking about now. And both from a macro and astrological perspective. And then I also give, strategy to people on a one-to-one level as well. So there at my website, you could find my Global Outlook 2026 report. And it's going to be somewhere about 150 to 200 pages, and it will cover the gamut. It'll go much, much deeper, lots of predictions, no vagueness in there, right? And how I think things are going to play out. And by the way, I just threw my 2025 report into ChatGPT last week. There's still some things playing out, but so far I got somewhere about 81 to 83% accuracy. Wow. So, yeah, so we'll see how it all turns out when the year closes out. And the way I do it, by the way, is I start with the astrological new year in March all the way through into the next year, into March of that next year. So 2025 is still playing out right now, even though right over the next month. And then by February, we transition really quick into 2026. So we'll see how the 2025 report came out in terms of the accuracy. But I think it'll probably in the end be somewhere about 75+%, which I'll be happy with. And hopefully it's much harder this year, Richard, to predict this year. Much, much more difficult. So going to give it my best shot, but we'll see what happens.
WilliamStickevers.com. We've got the link in the description, so that'll take you right there for the Global Outlook forecast and the report and the 8 Red Pill Truths as well, which is another freebie available on the website.
Yes.
William, always so enlightening. Thank you so much.
Thank you. Thank you again for Richard, for having me on, and Happy New Year.
Happy New Year to you.
A new Richard Syrett's Strange Planet drops every Monday, Wednesday, and Friday.